You're all very welcome this afternoon to our discussion, which is on building resilient economies, building resilient African economies. But today, the perspective that we are going to take is more on the private sector view of things, and especially the private sector view in Uganda. We will also borrow from what is happening in the region, what is happening in Africa. But I would like to ask you to join me in welcoming our panelists today. We have two panelists. We have Sophie Achak, and we also have Peter Mugenyi, who will be taking us through this discussion today. And our aim really is to bring down to the level of private sector people, employed people, working people, a discussion on how can we participate, each of us, in building resilient economies, first with Uganda and then going out to the region and the rest of Africa. What does it mean to you and me? I believe it is a shared responsibility. We cannot just put it to the government and say the government is the one that has to do everything. Each of us, you and I, are participants, and therefore we have a role to play in building resilient economies. And what does it mean to be resilient? We are going to go into a discussion on this. What does it look like to build a resilient economy that can withstand pressures? We've had so many pressures in the past. Thankfully, COVID is behind us, but that was a big test, not only for ourselves, this part of the world, but it was a global test. And seeing how resilient our economies were. And so how do we deal with all these challenges that come up? Will our economies withstand, and how can we strengthen them? So I'll start just by reading the biography of Madame Sophie Achak. And Sophie, I'll then give you an opportunity to greet our audience. Sophie is a seasoned banker with over 20 years experience in the banking sector, 12 of which were on a senior management level. This involved developing and implementing strategies that improve the bottom line, building and strengthening business structures and relationships with stakeholders. Sophie's passion and career objective is to use her knowledge and skills and experience gained throughout her career to provide guidance, mentorship, and coaching on matters relating to financial literacy and growth. So we've got the right person in the room, yeah? She supports, she's looking to support appropriate policy formulation or enhancements to improve socio-economic challenges at an individual level, at the national level, and continental level in the financial space. Sophie's interests are in financial management, training with a keen interest in the investment space, in public speaking, in singing, and listening to music. She likes to read specific literature, especially in relation to economics, finance, and faith. That is Christian literature. And her highest attained qualifications are an MBA in finance from Anglia Ruskin University in the UK. And she's still in the pursuit of knowledge, especially in finance, accounting, and the investment field. She's also a certified professional coach and currently works with Stanbic Uganda Group. Sophie, you're very welcome.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Good afternoon to you all. Look forward to the session.
Thank you.
I hope I spoke while the microphone was off mute. Were you able to hear me?
Yes, we are able to hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Our second panelist today is Patrick Mugenyi. Patrick is a Ugandan who has served in both private and public sector roles. He's 49 years old, so he's got a lot of experience. He is passionate about business and governance. He's a lawyer by training. He graduated with a bachelor's degree from Makerere University in 1998, and he also holds a postgraduate diploma in legal practice from the Law Development Center in Kampala. He holds professional certificates in marketing and has successfully completed the Executive Development Program of the Gordon Institute of Business Science at the University of Pretoria. Patrick has had 25 years of his career beginning in the public sector, where he served at the Ministry of Justice under the capacity building project of the Uganda Law Reform Commission. Patrick went on to join the private sector through Coca-Cola Subco, where he served for 9 years, living and working in different emerging markets in Africa and Asia. So we've got a lot of broad experience here. In 2009, Patrick returned home to found and run a logistics business. He established and managed Madet Logistics Uganda Limited for 4 years, during which he found time to help establish the Kampala Capital City Authority, where he served for 8 months. In 2013, Patrick was headhunted and took an assignment on at Hima Cement, Lafarge Wholesale, where he served for 4 years in the roles of increasing intensity, culminating in the dual role of General Manager for Rwanda and Sales Director, Regional Business Unit, Uganda, Rwanda, Eastern DRC, and South Sudan. He helped to achieve historically strong results. In 2017, again, he was headhunted to turn around the largest private sector company, NFC, which is New Forest Company, and he was the first Ugandan to serve in a role that had previously seen 8 leaders in 10 years. He served 5 years and achieved historically significant results while at New Forest. In 2023, Patrick was headhunted again to support the leadership transition from the founding family to a multinational investor at Harris International, which is a leading food and beverages business. And he served in the role of a deputy managing director at Harris International for 7 months. He is privileged to lead family-run entities that have interest in agriculture and education. In addition to his commercial activity, Patrick has significant board and non-profit engagements that include Bethel Foundation, Acclaim Africa, Watoto Church Entebbe, Institute for National Transformation, INT, Reach One, Touch One Ministries, Mild May, Uganda, Busitema University, and the Agro Entrepreneurship Center. There are many roles that he holds in those different capacities as chairman and as executive director emeritus. Patrick is happily married to Evelyn, his wife of 25 years, and they are blessed with an adult brood of 5 children. Nathaniel, who's 22, Rebecca, 20, Kyla, who's 18, Joel, 16, and Annalise, who's 13. They make their home outside of Entebbe, where they maintain a healthy lusuku, along with the German Shepherd's Duke, Panda, Bear, and Lady. So we've got a really interesting panel with us this morning with diverse experience, and we hope that this will come into play. We will see a lot of it as we discuss building resilient economies across Africa and in specific here in Uganda. So you're all very welcome.
Thank you very much. It's very good to be here.
Yes, thank you, Patrick. So let's get straight into our discussion. And as I said, there's a lot of courage that we need to take in this shared responsibility as we look to build our economies. There's some work that we have done, but there's a lot more to be done ahead of us. And we are building on from what Professor Vincent discussed in the last session. Professor Vincent Adegbogu gave us a really good presentation where he highlighted 10 specific areas that he thought would be the foundation of building resilient African economies. Today, we are going to just touch on 5 of these points, and we will have a follow-on session where we'll also talk about the next 5. So in total, we will have talked about the 10 over 2 sessions. One of the issues that he raised, one of the foundations, is having diversified economies, diversifying our economies. And maybe I can start with you, Patrick. What is a diversified economy like from your viewpoint as a private sector player?
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, again. And Sophie, it's good to be with you on the panel. When you talk of diversification as a private sector actor, what I think of is being in many places that allows me to manage difficulties. So there are difficult seasons in business. And for example, if you happen to have a shop in Wandegea, and this is the shop that you go to, and there happens to be a road that's being built, and it's going to take them 3 months to build that road, suddenly your customers can't reach you. The idea of diversification is that if you happen to have had a second shop, say in a growing area like Nigeria, then you may not feel as hurt financially by having that one shop in one day get affected by the road construction. Maybe Nigeria is not yet on the list of roads to be worked on. So you can also, diversification is this idea that we can be in multiple places or in multiple sectors, and when shocks come, we can absorb them and keep earning, keep moving without getting into distress. The only thing I would add is at a national level is diversification would be the idea that as a nation, or as a continent even, are we actively developing different parts of the country? Are we actively developing, for instance, tourism? Are we actively developing the service, which is tourism part of the service sector? Are we actively developing manufacturing? Are we actively developing mining? So there are all these sectors of the economy that need to work together so that if we're in trouble in one, we're not as badly affected and we can keep moving.
Thank you, Patrick. And maybe I'll ask Sophie also to weigh in her comments on the same.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I don't disagree with Patrick. I think what we'll do, just to add on to what Patrick has said, is probably share that presentation just on the macros that gives a view on the country and what it looks like. Speaking into what Professor said, but now from a Ugandan context, to just give evidence, if I may say, in terms of our need for diversification. If we remember COVID, what COVID did was test how resilient we were at a national level, at an individual level, with so many businesses closed. So one of the things that we need to really pay attention to is how diversified our businesses are. So if we look at this particular structure of our economy, I hope we can all see the screen. What it says here is that our economy is largely informal. But if you look at on the left, I hope you can see my cursor. I don't even know if it can be seen. But if you look at the left there, GDP, contribution to GDP, services are great. Okay, thank you. Thank you for pointing that out, for using your cursor. Service industry, the people that provide services, it contributes 42% to our entire GDP. Then agriculture, which is a main employer of most Ugandans, is just 23%. Yeah. If you look at the industries, manufacturing and them, it's 26%. And then the rest of the other potentially sectors, tourism and them, are just 7.8%, rounded off to 8%. So if you see it's skewed towards the services, that's where you see the bankings of this world and the rest. So just, I want to take us also to that graph. Just follow with me, then get to the granular bit of it. If you look at that graph, even though agriculture contributes only 23.8%. Look at that agriculture graph. 95% of the agriculture is informal, as in I have a garden in my home, yeah? And it's largely for subsistence purposes, to feed my family and then sell a little, probably just to get something small, extra money to buy salt and them. Just 5% of it is formal. If you see the darker shade there, the darker orange, just 5% is formal. Then we move to the industry space, and we'll talk about the biggest contributors to our GDP. We're going to get down to specific spaces. GDP, industry, 53, it's almost a 50-50% split from an industry perspective. 53% is informal and 53% is informal and then 47 is formal. Moving on to services, 58% is formal, and we'll see that most of the service providers are actually multinationals, if anything. Then informal is 42. It's the one that has the biggest percentage of the informal, rather the formal business. Then from an overall perspective, 45 is formal and 55 is informal. What does that tell you? We don't have systems in place. We don't have records necessarily. The biggest percentage of our businesses and the work that we do basically is informal. And that's what we want to talk about when we get down to the granular level of speaking to ourselves. So what it says is basically largely informal. And then look at the working population. 68%, I'm going to speak to only one, 68% of the population of Uganda is employed in the agriculture space. Remember, we said that 95 is informal. I basically have a garden that is largely for, or I have a farm that is largely for feeding my family, subsistence agriculture. And a small portion is just to sell to the small market. Don't just think about the population in Kampala. We're talking about now the rest of Uganda. This is where most of our people are employed as Uganda in the agriculture space. Then you look at the other percentages, they are really small, trade, manufacturing, the industry space, very small percentages that employ Ugandans. So majority are in agriculture, and we can see that it's informal. Let's go on to the next slide. Now I want to just see what the population looks like. So of that population that is predominantly employed in agriculture, actually, before I speak to that, of course, we know our total population is 49, recent census, 49.2 million. I'm at the top, 49.2 million. 70% of this group, of this population, are 30 years and below. So I can comfortably say I qualify for an elder. Never mind that in other countries, I may not necessarily be an elder. Majority of us. The bigger population of Uganda is below the age of 30. So even as we think about how to make our businesses more resilient, how do we speak to this contingent that is below 30%, even as we're thinking about how we do our businesses, means that your employee base will largely be a young contingent below 30. How do we speak to that? 50% is below, I think it was below 20 or around 18 years of age there, 50% of our population. Now, the average growth rate of our population is 3%. 25 is urbanized. What it means by urbanized is not just Kampala. If you think about all the districts around Kampala, in the town, 27% are largely in the town, which means the other percent, the bigger percentage, are in the rural space. So when I think about business ideas and how to remain resilient as a nation, yeah, and as a continent, we should be solving for that contingent, yeah, the younger team and the team that are in the rural space. How can we help them become more relevant and resilient, create businesses that are more relevant? If we compare to other East African countries, look at where Kenya is, the growth rate. Their growth rate is 2.4, Nigeria 1.7, Tanzania 3, similar to us as well. So around African continent, we are growing at a fast pace, which can be good, which is a good thing. We have a team, we have a population that is that can provide us a dividend in the future in terms of a work, the people that can create demand for our goods, people that can be employed. But then again, what it also speaks to is there could be a burden, a dependency burden. If we look at it globally, from a global space on the right, the growth level is about 1.1. And this is predominantly in the emerging economies. When I say emerging, we're talking about Africa, somewhere South America, somewhere in East Europe, Asia there. That's where they're actually growing. Most of the European nations are actually on a decline. So there's an advantage to it. What it speaks to is that there is potentially good demand that can come from this population that is growing, especially in the African space and the emerging markets. But we have a challenge of high dependency. So there's a bit of work even as we think about how to develop resilient businesses. If we look at the infrastructure, when we talk about infrastructure, these are some of the things that Professor spoke about. Internet is one of the tools of operation in our current setting today. It's a big business. It's a big tool for operation. In Uganda alone, this is based off the statistics that UBOS, Uganda Bureau of Statistics, did recently. Total internet users, just 13.3 million, which is a 27% penetration. How many are actually getting access to internet? That's what penetration rate means, 27%. If we look at other African countries, not so far from where Uganda is, Kenya is 32, Nigeria 38. South Africa is the unique one, 74%, a bit more developed than the rest of us in Africa. But look at the rest of the world, at 90% uptake of internet. Yeah, people getting onto the internet. If we talk about the internet, this is a platform that is used for advertising. Think about the business structures of today. Most of us advertise on WhatsApp, your business, you do on WhatsApp, you do on, Instagram and all those guys, yeah? All those platforms. It's through the internet, basically. That's the new form of doing business. If we're operating at 27%, is it good? Do we need to improve it? And those are the key things that we need to think about as we develop our businesses. It is inevitable that we have to create internet access, whether from an individual standpoint or the policies and the engagements with government to improve internet access. Then we look at mobile phone, 33% total access, total number of people who have access to phones, cell phones, 33.3%. But look at the platforms. 2.6 million Ugandans are on Facebook, 0.7 are on Instagram, 0.7 million, which is 700,000 people are on Instagram, 1.3 are on LinkedIn. The new social media users on the right, 750,000 users. That's the growth, yeah? Year-on-year growth. That's a huge growth. That tells you where our young people are largely operating, on the social media platforms. So if we're going to address this contingent, it means we have to create our businesses around the social media platforms. This is where we'll get these people, the larger contingent of Ugandans, yeah, and the rest of the world. It's a similar statistic by there across the world, the uptake, because of course the younger people take up, mainly use the social media platforms. If we talk about access to electricity, this is for our industries, largely, of course, for enablement of our operations of our industries, 45.2%, not bad for a developing country, but it really could get better. I think that's why we're seeing our government trying to develop all these dams. Karuma recently also launched Karuma dam to create more access to electricity. But interestingly, Uganda does supply our neighbors electricity, and look at where our neighbors are. Kenya is at 76%. These are 2020. These are statistics we could get. Kenya is at 76.4%. We actually do export to them electricity as well. Nigeria, 60.5%. Interesting there. Nigeria specifically is heavy on what's this thing called? The one that uses diesel. Generators. They use quite a bit of generators. So it's interesting that they're actually lower. They have lower access than Kenya, but they use a lot of generators. What does electricity do in running of our industries? This is something that government would drive to ensure we have a growth in the manufacturing and industry sector, if we want to see a bigger growth there from a diversification perspective. Then funds raised. Now, from a financing perspective, most of us raise funds from savings. These are statistics I couldn't get easily. But if we look at external investors investing into our startup business, funds raised. In Uganda specifically, the total raised was $183 million. But in other African nations, and I picked up the major ones, Kenya surpassed Nigeria, specifically last year. Kenya surpassed Nigeria and raised close to 800 million, slightly less than $800 million from different investors, foreign investors, into their market, specific to startups, the category of SME where most of us who have individual businesses lie. Then Nigeria, last year, raised about 410, but historically, they've been the ones who actually raised the most. Some of the things that we'll talk about in terms of how we can create resilient businesses is how we are able to attract finances, yeah? And this is one of them. So this gives you an overview of what our country, our nation looks like in comparison to the region and just a few areas to the developed world. What does that basically tell you from that statistics shared? There is a strong need for diversification. Patrick did talk about spreading to other regions. There's a heavy concentration, for example, in Kampala just alone. But if there was diversification geographically, developing industries across the different regions of Uganda, so that most of the populace is not pulled into Kampala, you can look at the strain on the resources in Kampala just alone. So that we can, if there's some level of diversification into those other regions, the first slide spoke to that, into those other regions would help us develop on a national basis in a better way, yeah? And also attract the youth from where they are. They don't have to come to Kampala. These are some of the things that we have to think about even as we try to develop resilient businesses. Patrick spoke about Nigeria, and some of the areas in Kampala. What about in our villages? Not all of us are from Kampala. Would it be useful, for example, to develop in northern Uganda? Start up something small, say in northern Uganda, and you're thinking about attracting businesses from South Sudan. So diversification, what it does, I think COVID was a very good example of why we need to operate beyond just what we are doing. The small shop that I have, okay, or just the one area that I'm specializing in, so that in the event it's hit, some of our shops were closed for a long time. In the event it's hit, something comes up that hits that business, you have another arm. The Bible actually says, one of the scriptures in Proverbs says, scatter your bread upon the waters, yeah? Try different areas. You just never know which one will come back yielding at a particular time. Even the Bible is telling us to do the same thing. So diversification is of the essence. Now, that's for those who have businesses. What about us who are employed? What is it telling you? Or what is it telling us? Why is diversification important? And I have spoken a long time, forgive me. For us who are in the employed space, beyond just your income, the one that comes from the place where you are employed, we need to develop a structure that allows us to get, that reduces reliance on not just the income where you're employed, but also other spaces that can bring you more money to create a big buffer, yeah, in the event there is a challenge. Should any challenge arise, should anything happen with your job, there is income coming from elsewhere, income that you can use to build up another business across the region or even in Kampala itself, so that you're not so reliant in one space and you're down and out should any incident happen. I hope I've not spoken too much, but to just say we need to operate beyond one form of doing business or one form of salary. What it does, it cushions us against any shocks in the economy, shocks in the different areas where we operate. Should there be a war, at least I know there's more than one avenue where I get my income from. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie, for that insight and for painting for us a picture of understanding the statistics, so that we are not just looking at, the small Kampala area. We are looking beyond and understanding where we fall in as Uganda in relation to the region. And also, thank you for referring also to West Africa. It starts to put things in context. I have a question also related now to this. Is there anything such as over-diversifying? Do you know at what point you say this is enough, let me be strategic and let me focus on this area? Is it that you go, so many, I saw you talked about the services, you talked about industry. How much can we do that does not have over diversifying, so that as a country, as people in private sector, we can then focus and hone in so that we achieve the desired results, we achieve the resilience you're talking about?
Thank you. I think, let me start and then I'll probably hand over to Patrick. Doctor, sorry, I keep saying doctor, but professor. Professors are called doctors, right? PhD. But if I may think about what Professor mentioned, he said we need to get to a place where we are creating value-added goods, goods that will give us the maximum value for us. I can attract the maximum amount of return. If I were to sell let me use what, maize, if, say, for example, the guys who do milk, if I did milk, direct milk, and one who actually is able to process this milk, actually, let me use a better example, chocolate or cocoa. One who sells cocoa and one who is able to process this cocoa into products that are value adding or products that have a high return, for example, like chocolate. And he talked about examples like Ghana, yeah? You will get a better return, someone who sells a better valued product like chocolate versus someone who just sells the cocoa directly. So we need to get to a place where we specialize and are able to bring high value goods. So going back to your question of over diversifying, when we are spread too thin and you're not heavily focused in one area, you've not built your capacity to deliver a certain level of better quality, you will get a low return. That is why most of us in the African continent, and specific to Uganda, and where we are an agrarian nation dealing agriculture, what we produce are largely largely raw products in their natural state, not enhanced. What extreme diversification will do will not allow you to focus. If you can focus, we need to build our strength. Even if I'm trying out some other things, there has to be a place where I have a specialization and I'm able to bring something that has high value and a better return. So yes, over diversification is bad. If you're doing too many things, when we talk about diversification, one or two things is not a bad thing, but you must have a specialty. You must have a specialty so that you get the highest value out of it. And this is specific to our businesses as well, or our careers. Yeah.
Thank you, Sophie. Patrick, let's hear from you some comments with regard to that.
I think that's really well said. You know, there's a common saying that you can be a jack of all trades and a master of none. And that's the danger we run by doing too many things. And I think Sophie really articulates it well. The thinking around specialization emerged, I think, in the 70s. It wasn't very obvious. And it gained ground. So we kind of began to run our economies, our businesses in a way with some measure of focus and say, what are we exactly good at? What can we, and authors came along and continue to teach us to try and focus and identify what it is that we're exceptional at. And my sense is that holds true even today, that even as we are building to be able to absorb shocks, we are building diverse sources of income, we should understand what our center is, what is our core, what is it that we are really good at. And so as we enter different sectors or different geographic areas, what is it that we are taking there? There are companies that are a bit exciting that have started in Uganda and are beginning to roll out across the region. It's fascinating to watch how they expand. I'm involved with one of them that is in the financial services space. And they're from Uganda and they're moving into Southern Africa. And just sitting in those meetings and beginning to hear what management is thinking and how they intend to roll out is fascinating, because it forces you to ask yourself, what am I taking into this new market that is different, that stands out, that allows us to win? And I think that speaks to this specialization idea, that as I cross over into new geographies, I am very conscious of what I am good at, and that is what will enable me to win in that market. So absolutely very risky to spread yourself too thin. To stay with the example of moving into different geographies, if you want to go to 5 different countries at the same time, most of us will say, okay, probably not a good idea. Let's try and settle one country, settle the teams in there before we roll out into other spaces. And that common sense approach, I think, can work.
Thank you, Patrick. And I think this is a good segue into our next point of discussion, which is investing in human capital, because it's people who do the development. Yes, now we've got AI and machine enablement, but at the end of the day, we are looking at our human capital and looking at equipping it to make it resilient. So talk to us, Patrick, if you can, about investing in human capital. How do you see that from a private sector perspective? What have we done so far? What does the horizon look like?
The private sector view, certainly the one I've been a part of, I think certain things stand out to me when we talk about human capital. The first is this idea that most people you talk to will say Ugandans are not productive. And even our own national development plan takes judicial notice of the fact that Ugandans are not productive. That, I think, doesn't help us. So fundamentally, I would encourage us to take a step back and just maybe apply a different lens. I've been part of teams, let's say, let's start with Coca-Cola. I was part of a Coca-Cola team that was based in Uganda, run by a Ugandan MD, that delivered results that had never been seen on the continent. And if you had told anybody that that was possible, I don't know anyone who would have believed you. So I suppose a better question is, how do we create an environment where our people can thrive and prosper? I think most of us are aware of Ugandans who are located outside of Uganda that are doing things that are simply inconceivable, things that are amazing. I had a conversation with a Ugandan based in South Africa who was running the largest infrastructure budget in South Africa. At the time I spoke with him, they were busy trying to find him a wife because they don't want him to leave, and he wasn't married then. That excellence that easily surfaces outside of our borders, we need to find a way of building a meritocratic system that allows it to shine within our borders, because we all win when that happens. So I would really try and debunk this idea that Ugandans are not productive, they are lazy, and they don't. That's not been my experience. And when I look around, it's not what I see. The second thought I would share is management within our context is not normal. If you run a business in Kenya, if you run a business in South Africa, if you run a business in Egypt, you can run on metrics that are very high level. Your dashboard will tell you what you want as a manager, and you simply crack a whip. And you say, I want X number of sales within this time, and that's how the thing will run. If the person doesn't deliver, you fire them, you get the next person, and we keep moving. My sense of where we stand as a nation within this African story is that our people need a different approach. It's almost more of a coaching type of leadership. To some extent, it's even fathering or mothering. I don't know what the appropriate term is. It's this idea that you get involved. You get involved in people's lives. It's not, you can't apply, I suppose the extreme example might be the US, where you're simply managing something off an Excel sheet, and that's how you run your business. I think to thrive here, people there needs to be some measure of connection. Either it's a need for training, a need for encouragement, but the leaders that opt to get involved and engaged will oftentimes, within the Ugandan context, get significantly better returns. Because I keep going back to a phrase I learned from one of the business ladies in Nigeria, and she spoke of discretionary energy, something she learned elsewhere. The more involved you are with the people that you lead in the marketplace, the more discretionary energy that they're going to bring. So our human capital is incredibly gifted. They have demonstrated this time and time again. And I think we do ourselves all a disservice to think that somehow we don't have that. And we keep pointing across the border. Oh, Kenyans are hardworking. Oh, Nigerians are hardworking. I would ask us to take another look. Ugandans are exceptional. Our ability to problem solve is almost second to none. Our resilience in difficulty, I can point to very few people groups that have been through what we've been through, retained a sense of humor, and kept moving. And those are things that work to our advantage. And let's ensure that we drive that. I'll say just one more thing that really touches me when we talk about human capital within our context, and that is, and I hinted on it earlier, this idea of a meritocracy. We are not good at that, I think. Our instinct seems to be for the familiar. So if you're a manager in a department, chances are you'll hire people you know. If you're a public sector leader, chances are you'll hire people you know. And that is euphemism for relatives. That sinks the entire ship. There is a big difference between the trust that somebody you're in relationship with will bring and the work and the leadership creativity required to envision somebody you've never met before in your life, but has the merit to drive the result that you need and the country needs and the continent needs. So to the extent that we will pivot in that direction, I think we will see incredible results. That meritocracy, the more we do it, the better we'll perform, I think. So those are my thoughts on human capital.
Yes, thank you, Patrick. And thank you for even highlighting the need for meritocracy. We need skilled people. We need people who are empowered to be in positions to drive the development that we want to see, and not so much based on people's relations. That, as you said, sinks the ship, and we are just, trying to harness what we have already and move forward. Sophie, I noticed in your bio that you have a particular leaning to coaching. And I would like to just ask you to speak to it, because I see that there is a need not only for the people who are already in the workspace, for example, employed, but also the ones who are still in school, because we are preparing our younger generations. I allude to the numbers when you are talking about our population with 70% being under 30 years. So if we keep the numbers in our mind and say, how do we reach out to the young working people and the next generation that's coming right after them that's still in the schooling space? What can we do at the school level to make sure that we are developing the next leaders to drive and keep our economies resilient? Sophie, over to you if you could just comment on that.
Okay, let me just start from this area. Something I wanted to mention on the human capital, Patrick did touch. We need to hire for competence. We should not be afraid, especially when you have a personal business. That's an investment you're making to make your business last beyond most of the lifespan of our individual businesses, a year, 3. You need to hire for competence. That's a good investment. Now, if we get back to our young people, there's a particular, so we need to kind of tailor it to where their interest is. That way, so when you're speaking, for example, to young people, I wouldn't speak the same way I would speak to the adults. I need to make it more interesting. I need to speak their language. So we need to tailor it to their language. In our day, and I'll say in our day, the kind of education system was a cram story. It was this, state it as is an exam. Many of these kids actually don't want to cram. They want to do it maybe digitally. How can we approach them digitally? And that is from the simplest form. Many of us are waiting to get to a computer school. When you are, as a parent at home or as in your business, are you bringing the kid to understand the Excel, that the work that you're doing Excel, how to actually manage for you the Excel? Because many of our businesses are small, are very small. Can I bring this teenager, because they're very good with this, the phones and the computer systems. Can I bring them to help me input this information? I'm beginning to get their interest and getting their ideas. And guess what? I'm beginning to automate and create structure around my small business. So that's how I'll start, because already I know he's interested in the computer space, and then I will actually create structure around my business. It is very important. And I like what I found out recently. The new curriculum is one that is a bit more practical for the students than it is our days back then, right? The exam, what you re-copy back, re-put back is what that shows that you're competent. So if I can speak to this kid from that technology aspect and in their space, I will be able to get their attention. Instagram, those things which many of us are afraid of. Many of our generation are afraid of. WhatsApp, it's common, Facebook, and all the other platforms. What is the language that they use? Can I get someone who is like them? Peer educators. That's something I actually did when I was a bit young. Peer educators, yeah? People who are like them, to speak their language and be able to reach out to them. But with a lot of activity, one of the key areas we need to develop actually as a nation is sports.
Yes.
Many of these guys are interested in sports, but bringing it back to the computer sports, the video games, it does take a lot of time. How do you create the right structure about handling these video games? Because they are actually useful. Some of the AI platforms that we have come off the knowledge that is built in that space or the usage of these computer games. And we bring that into our business. It's amazing actually what these kids can develop, or this young contingent can develop and bring into your business. We need to nuance it for Africa. Because remember, not everybody has access to that. We've talked about the percentage of internet uptake or access to internet. The way we can simplify it is me in my simple business bringing this kid with their knowledge of usage of, because many of them interestingly have access to, in schools they have access to smartphones. How do I get them away from that smartphone and bring the knowledge they've gotten from that smartphone into my business? So I'm not making it look like you are wasting time. You're actually useful. Yeah, you're actually useful for my business. That is one of the ways that I've actually seen. Interestingly, I've actually worked with young people as well. And if you can get them in that space, they'll begin to tell you things that you'll be shocked that you can apply in your business. But a critical thing that I think we need to do is, and this is in partnership with public sector, actually, I thought about it earlier. You know, in Katwe, guys have developed very unique things. These are very, very young guys as well, actually. In Katwe, they've actually developed very unique things from the automated, rather the cars, bicycles, the motorbikes as well. What can we do to attract the right funding into this Katwe area? They have not necessarily gone to school, but train them to develop such automated things like the cars that are necessary for us, the motorcycles, that are necessary. That could itself be a business actually as well. So based of my experience with the young people, and I'm talking about 22 and below really, the ones whom I've dealt with, we have to come to them with their language. The things they have access to on phone can actually be very necessary for our business. Many of our businesses are struggling because they are on paper. Our accounts are on paper, if they are there at all. We can bring these children into that space, the teenagers. That will also keep them from doing a lot of reckless things outside. Get them, and you'll be doing the video piece as well. I mean, the kind of games that they want to do, they'll feel useful in your business, and so help you also drive the right structures within your business, keeping records, but automated and growing further because they keep updating themselves on those platforms.
Yeah, thank you, Sophie. And I see how we are now taking advantage of our demographic dividend, the young people, and bringing them into the story of building our resilient African economy, making sure that we go ahead, no one is left behind. So to our listening audience, don't let that teenager sit around, and get them involved when they're on holiday, practically, so that they are part of the growth story. I think we'll move on just to manage time and talk a bit about infrastructure development. Mainly, this is usually a government-led area, but I would like us to have a bit of a discussion. And Sophie, maybe we'll pick this up with you. What is the role of a private sector, and is there a role that the private sector can play in infrastructure development, maybe from a banking perspective? You know, sometimes we are looking and seeing that funding is the problem, So is there any creative ways that the private sector can work in partnership with government in terms of developing the critical infrastructure that we need to remain resilient? Roads, bridges, even access to electricity. It's one thing to have Karuma Dam, which was launched previously, producing the electricity. But how about getting that electricity out to the people? Are there sufficient power lines? Is it being evacuated well? Is it being used up in an efficient way? So if you maybe speak a bit to that, on how private sector can come in as well and partner with government.
Okay, so actually I know that many of the transactions that were put together to get the funding for these large electricity, the dams and all that stuff were actually handled in the private sector space. But if, of course, doing the transactions along with government, creating the right transaction to bring the funding. But if I may just bring this a little down to our individual businesses. Again, so when you look at the infrastructure, we're talking about maybe the roads from a larger standpoint, that would be public sector, the electricity, that would be public sector, government supporting it. But if I talk about the infrastructure, say, and I'll bring it back to use the internet, really. It is what the private sector can do, best of our knowledge. For example, many of us who have worked in these institutions and have gotten knowledge that they've used to bring these transactions on board, for example, and many of us have different skills in different spaces, HR and all that stuff. Can we use the same information to train through our companies, but also as individuals, to train these smaller businesses in the rural setting, in the individual business setting as well? Train someone how to make that particular transaction relevant for you to attract funding. Make your business relevant for you to attract the necessary funding online without even necessarily engaging, say a particular person physically. Can I help you to train you on how to present your business online and make it attractive so that you can get the necessary funding you need? So what's that infrastructure? It's an e-infrastructure. If I develop the right, I train you how to put together a website based off the knowledge I've got in the company that I'm employed in, private sector, and I'm able to train the SME or even the individual, my own personal business, on how to create that right website, an attractive website that will draw attention of some of these, what you call angel funders, the people who fund smaller businesses. That in itself is a way I've helped, from a private sector perspective, lower the level by which people can actually get access to finance, but also help them build an infrastructure that will make their business more attractive and also get other players a wider market. If I would make it relevant to our particular spaces. Website one, the things we've gotten from these larger companies, the knowledge. Let's go and train the guys on how to put up a creative website. One of the things, if we looked at the funding metric, Uganda is 183 million. Kenya was 800 million. What is it that they're doing uniquely that is different from us? One of the reasons why they called Africa a dark continent is not necessarily because of our color. It is actually lack of information. Yeah, it was like it's almost like you're putting your money into a black hole. Yeah, that's why it was dark continent. They had no access to information. How do we train our people, our SME businesses and the rest, to become more transparent? I know many of our businesses are afraid, but that is the way we are going to actually help them attract the right funding. And what are those tools? It is online. That is the infrastructure we're talking about. The larger ones, it's going to be a trick. It's going to be with larger entities, partnerships with the public sector to be able to put those electricity things in place and all those roads. But down to the smaller business, I need to become more transparent. That way I'll be able to attract the right partners into my business, those websites, automated systems, building that right structure within my business is what I'll look at from a private sector down to the SME, the individual business. Yeah.
Thank you, Sophie. And Uganda has 90% SMEs in our economic environment. So we are looking to speak to population within the SME space, but also to the larger companies, so that we are engulfing the whole private sector, not leaving anyone out of this. Peter, I don't know if you have, sorry, Patrick, I don't know if you have any comments based on what Sophie has said.
Yes, a couple of comments there. I think digital infrastructure, I love what I'm hearing. It is because it's easy not to remember that. So I appreciate Sophie highlighting that. I thought I had seen something spectacular when the business processing organizations cropped up. So all these call centers that were handling traffic for global clients. Fascinating. And that took off, and then it sort of cooled off a bit, and there are a few companies that are still struggling in there, and they're running. But what is increasingly happening, I think, and it's really important to note, is the number of young people whose livelihoods depend on the internet is a staggering number. Some have full-time jobs working for employers in other jurisdictions, the US, the UK, and in other places. They are actually employed. They're not even running their own businesses, and they work different hours. That, I think, speaks to the need to have really, really, really strong digital infrastructure. And I think government has picked up on this, and it's all I would say is more, cheaper, quicker. More, cheaper, quicker. Now, when we go to our legacy systems, or the infrastructure that we commonly refer to, the physical that we can touch and feel and see, without a doubt, road network is far and ahead, a very, very quick area that we can talk to. A lot has gone in there. And to the extent that we can open up the country meaningfully, a lot of trade can take place. There are still areas that are really underserviced, and that's a cause for great concern. And those, I hope, would be addressed very quickly. Now, as private sector actors, if an area is poorly serviced, then trade cannot grow as unhindered. It becomes very problematic. I've done work regionally, and one of the places that I go to and I come back home and I have absolutely no complaints is Eastern Congo. I've spent a bit of time doing business in Eastern Congo. And the poor infrastructure there, when you compare with our experience, is really, really stifles growth. It's simple things. Can tomatoes get to the market before they rot? Am I actually able to set up a factory in a place that will create employment with all the knock-on benefits? So infrastructure is a big deal. I'll conclude my thoughts in the energy space, which you touch on. And energy, I think we have learned over the years, is such a very critical indicator of how well we are doing in our development as a nation. And the onboarding of different projects, Karuma being the latest, I think is really huge. It is very concerning that we can have high capacity to generate and lower capacity to evacuate. So that's a planning issue that I think is within our control. And I imagine that's being fixed very quickly. The thing that has to be said about energy is cost of power. Once you get to, those, it's a bit sad to think that when we talk of industrialization or manufacturing, we are quietly, what we are not saying is that the heavy manufacturers, almost none are Ugandans. I use the word almost to emphasize a point. And they may be Ugandan citizens, but not indigenous Ugandans. And I'm harping on it a little bit because I think we need to be really intentional about growing and building this domestic innovation and ability to engage in manufacturing. And one of the hindrances is cost of doing business. And a significant slice of that is cost of power. So I know there's a target to bring it down by almost half. But everybody I talk to kind of smiles and looks the other way. I think that is, let's call it work in progress. So infrastructure, I would agree with Prof's assessment that is extremely, extremely important, and we need to be very, very intentional. The Kenya experience is useful for our conversation this morning because I think, especially in the startup space, they've raised a lot of money. But every list I have read of startup businesses in Kenya are actually American owned. So the classification is something we need to be very intentional about. The American owned, the American led. Now they classify as Kenya because they're located in Kenya. So that's still a win for the economy, no doubt. But then we need to be asking ourselves as we chase that number, how do we do it in a more wholesome way, where the amazing ideas that we are hearing across our classrooms and our churches and our congregating places coming from the young people can actually be funded and compete on fair ground. I don't think it is enough to say Facebook has opened up in Uganda and we raised X funding. It will drive our macros really high, but maybe the impact will not be as much. So the hard work, I think, still lies ahead for us. And we need to unpack this quite well.
Yeah. Thank you, Patrick. And probably part of the answer lies in what Sophie touched on earlier. People who are in specific spaces that have the experience through their employment or, through what they have done over the years that would now assist SMEs, assist the smaller business to understand how do you present in the best position to get funding? How do you take this small idea, which looks small because it's still confined to being on paper and maybe has not had access to the internet or had access to dressing it well for the market to attract angel investors? How do we move to that level using the experience and expertise that we already have in country? I think there's a lot of learning here that needs to take place, a lot of coaching, as we spoke about that also. So engagement is one of the key things that I hear coming out quite a lot. I think we'll also move into the discussion on strengthening regional integration. You spoke about DRC and trade that goes on there. We touched a bit on Kenya and seeing how there's a lot of investment coming into the country. Regarding regional integration, what do you see the role of private sector players in enhancing and growing this regional integration? Because there is power in the numbers, yeah. But how is private sector looking at regional integration? Are they a part of it? Are they influencing policy? How are they players in this space? Maybe Patrick, you can start off with that.
So my thoughts are that I think it's good news because private sector is very engaged, and I think what we have seen. Let's start regionally within East Africa, the East African community. The presidents of the countries have been very intentional about making sure it's private sector led, and that's a huge win. When you talk to different people within our private sector, a lot of companies are thinking regionally. Even if I'm really small and I run this small chicken operation in my backyard, I'm selling trays of eggs. Chances are I'll have an idea of what's happening in the Kenyan market because that's a very significant part of my addressable market. They affect the price at which I can sell, and I'm doing everything I can to make sure I can meet the standards that they want. So the regional integration is huge, and the private sector currently, I feel, are very, very engaged. What does that mean for our competitiveness? And some of these ideas we're talking about keep interweaving. The meritocracy we spoke about, the competence we spoke about, because now when you begin to cross borders and you begin to engage further afield, the game changes a little bit. The pace, the excellence required to deliver in those markets will be different and will require different approaches. One of the companies I've been involved in was very, very intentional about growing regionally into the different markets. We've done business in Tanzania as an example. For you to break through in Tanzania, the time required invested in market to be accepted, to be received well is significant. And you're going to invest that time, you're going to compete. But it's only because there is a significant move within the region to harmonize our markets. Now, the big wave that is here with us that I think we need to mention up front is the Continental Free Trade Area. That's going to change many things. If we are inefficient as a nation, we will get the short end of the stick. What I think that means is we will be losers. So even what we call industries here, if we're not efficient, people who are driving higher levels of efficiency, if it's, for instance, cost of energy, if I'm able to produce a unit, let's call it a bar of soap, I'm able to produce a bar of soap in, pick a country, in Zambia, at 2 shillings per unit of power. And in Uganda, I'm producing at 12 shillings per unit of power. If I add my transport costs and layer on my profit margin, I'm landing in Kampala at 10 shillings per unit. You're still at 12 on power alone. How are you going to compete? So as these regions begin to merge, our weaknesses are highlighted. And I think we need to desperately, as private sector actors, become more efficient. We're going to be forced to. Some companies are a bit ahead of others. The multinationals are already there, in my understanding. And those of us who are in smaller operations, we have to find ways of ensuring that we are competitive. That may require moving into new areas. Because if the rules have changed and they can freely access our markets at similar quality at lower pricing, we're going to struggle to retain what we call our market shares. And the market is open. The market is not going to remain loyal to you because they know you. I think they're buying a service, they're buying a product, and as long as it's giving them value, they'll stay with you. So regional integration as a whole, I think, is good, but it does have significant repercussions for all of us. And private sector is leading as of now, but I think there's still work to do to drive efficiencies to be able to compete across the continent.
That's right. It's an ongoing engagement. Thank you. Thank you, Patrick. Sophie, if you have any comments on that as well.
I won't differ. He's really mentioned the fact that private sector is driving this quite a bit. And thank God that government is also thinking in the same line. The comment I want to make is my day job is I deal with investors. Most of them are largely offshore investors. Now, many of the guys who approach Africa, think about it like many of the Western world. They're consolidated, if I may use one word. They're bigger. So they think we are the same, yet we are quite, each country is sovereign in its state and smaller. So the need for us to work together, that regional integration cannot be underscored. Some of them come with large amounts. Their ticket size, when I said ticket, it's what's the amount they're willing to test this market with? And many of them come like with a transaction of $50 million. In Uganda, that you're already disorganizing, you're causing disorganization with that size of money. So what is it telling us? That we have to work together. When I think about how we can work in the private sector to help increase our level of quality of what we produce, I think about what has happened recently, and this is something that is growing. These circle structures, the investment clubs that are now pulling different individual companies and different individuals, using that structure to improve and drive quality conversations will help us develop better at our different levels. So operating alone will not help you because you're in a dark space, you're in a particular space and you can't see everything. As a group, you're exposed to many other quality requirements. So in my opinion, as a country and coming down to the private sector, that circle structure is what will help us in our individual businesses get to that level of development. So what the companies will do, like the multinationals, they have that, what you'd call CSI, corporate social investment, going into those combined structures of the circles and the investment clubs to teach them the quality that is needed, to drive some, even as we go towards, so before this meeting, we were talking about, Patrick has managed to migrate to self-employment, something that I'm going to have to work towards. Some of the things that we can work on, those of us who are employed, is how can we develop the capability to go and then be the trainer of these structures, these investment clubs, to drive that quality? Because bottom line, we can't deal with a few. If we are going to build resilience, it's not resilience of one entity. One entity can only bring so much change. Driving a bigger group of entities and individuals is what will make a difference for our country. And if it's shifting for our country and the region as a whole, because Kenya is much ahead of us, actually, investment clubs, actually, and some of these groups that we're talking about, if you can drive that quality, ultimately it will trickle down to me, the individual. That quality requirement of what I'm producing, what I'm doing, attracting funding, those groups will be very helpful. If you can work on them, actually, in my opinion, it is something that will shift our nation drastically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sophie. Maybe just to say that the world is indeed flat. We should stop thinking on just a very small level and thinking of Kampala, as you said at the start of my small business. It's time to take it a notch higher. And then, as you're saying, working with the circles, working with groups of companies, and not so much only the individual. The individual will benefit from working with the groups, but I hear a lot of empowerment, a lot of learning, a lot of getting to international standards if we want to remain competitive. So I think we can finally touch on to promoting good governance. I'm sorry we are rushing it here as we come to the end just to manage our time, but all this cannot happen unless we have the right environment on good governance. And I would like for you to touch on, yes, good governance in connection with the national level, but also down to our businesses. What does it mean for private sector to have good governance within our small businesses? Because without the right governance structures, I think we are already at a loss. Yeah. So Sophie, if you can just speak into that, please.
Okay. Let me, if we bring it to our individual businesses, what good governance will look like is the structure we talked about, building systems within our business. You have records, number one. You are transparent. So most of us in our businesses, I am the owner. I am the one who knows the vision. I am the one who knows the finances. When I am absent, which is in a full stop, it's rather everything is a full stop. Some of our churches are actually similar, interestingly. So when the vision bearer goes, that is it. It is done. And we saw a number of these businesses go down during the COVID season, unfortunately, because the vision bearer passed on. So how do we build continuity plans? How do I get my son or my daughter to also understand, or another competent person who can actually run this business at the end of the day to benefit my children? And that is my contingency plan. If I am away for some reason, if I am sick and life happens, hospital for a while, or I have to travel, the business is not at a standstill because there is no one to, because I'm absent. So building those appropriate governance structures, we should get to a place. I know as you start a business, it's usually just you alone. But along the way, as you grow, you having one partner, your what you'd call a business partner, even your prayer partner for that matter, but someone who has an inclination towards business, to keep you accountable. Yeah, this is what I intend to do as you start. Now, as you grow and the businesses get bigger, we should get to the confident level of saying, at least let me have one or two board members who hold me, the owner of the business, accountable, that I want to achieve that vision. I have a plan in place and I'll actually achieve it. I have accounts. So that is very important. Those governance structures cannot be underscored. It's one of the things that our businesses are struggling with, really. There is no one to whom I account. I am the alpha and the omega of this business. When I go down, we go down with the business. Therefore, there's no legacy, really, in this particular story. So when we come to our SMEs, that's really from a good governance perspective, that's what we need to look at. The right structures, accountability, the finances are in order, a continuity plan, a human resource structure, some form of human resource. They don't need to be big. Even if I have two, as I grow that structure with competent people. That's what good governance will look like in our smaller businesses. Yeah.
Thank you, Sophie. Patrick, maybe if you can speak to good governance in the context of the private, as we are in private sector, but also touch on the public sector with your experience.
Yeah. Each time you say experience, you make me feel old, but that's okay.
You're young, young, but knowledgeable.
I like what Sophie, I think she really articulates it well. The idea that, we need to kind of get past ourselves. And it's difficult. I've started businesses, plural. A few have died. Some are still in really bad shape, but at least one is cash flowing reasonably. For an entrepreneur, for somebody who's starting a business, to have a mindset of this thing has to be bigger than me is very critical. Because then you get help, then you get input, then you improve on this hot idea or hot core that you carry. And so I fully associate with the comments around what we need to do as small businesses or medium-sized enterprises. From a public sector point of view, governance is huge. We don't do ourselves a lot of favors as a nation when we fill the airwaves with our levels of corruption. I've lived and worked in Thailand as an example. With respect to the Thais on the call, we do not compare. We do not compare. I think our major failing is that despite our obvious weaknesses, which they are, we somehow manage to also not deliver. The two are not always mutually exclusive. So what does good governance looks like? I think good governance, part of it, the first step is strong institutions. If we don't allow for strong institutions to lead, we are not building sustainably. That to me speaks for itself. So to stick with a safe example like Thailand, which is very, very far, the levels of corruption are epic. Political corruption is exceptional. But structurally, what have they done to ensure that there is growth in the economy, there is change in the quality of life of the average Thai, even in the north? They have a big issue in the north. They've ring-fenced certain areas. What we call local content here, they implement in a way that it is literally impossible for capital to just flow into the country, pick up an idea and exploit it for extraction purposes. You're going to have significant Thai involvement. The more progress we can make down that way, I think the better it will be. So structure, strong institutions that help us drive public sector governance. Before we started, I was listening to seeking ideas, and one of the interesting thoughts I had was that if you think about government's contribution to GDP or spend of government, it is significant in driving what happens in the private sector. Now, if you don't have strong governance around how government spends, it's going to be a problem. So simple things like public procurement. How do we award tenders? Who gets to supply the beans that our institutions need from public sector? So strong institutions, that's one. Two, we need to model strong leadership. How do I call it? Integrity, maybe, might be an easier word. The idea that things can be run based upon what's best for the institution. And that's driven by people. So these same people that would rather, if I'm in charge of making sure that there is sufficient oil reserves in the country, and I ask Mrs. Mugenyi to supply the oil, it's going to cause problems. If she's late on some deliveries, if she buys it off the regular market, and things of this nature. So the knock-on effects in private sector are huge because governance at a public sector level is struggling. And the argument I would make, even as we work on our appetite to do right things, we can actually build institutions or allow for strong institutions that will safeguard the bare minimums, and we will see significant uplift in the well-being of the people. So that to me is huge. And private sector doesn't exist in a vacuum. The policies that are in place generally for Uganda, in my estimation, are very good. You read the NDP, the thinking is quite solid. The direction is quite clear. And then you have to ask yourself, where is the disconnect? Or why are we struggling? Why are we reporting high macro numbers? Our growth is, I think it's now been upgraded to something like 6% per annum, which from economic indicators is a really good performance. Why is it that we're reporting 6% growth, but I talk to the lady that sells me tomatoes and she's looking at me like, are you mad? What are you talking about? So how do we, it's down to governance. And so to the extent that we can ensure those macros are reflected at a micro level with the individuals, we will significantly spur private sector. And I don't think there's any way of skirting the issue. If you look, Africa struggles with this. I've just given an Asian example where they struggle with this. A starting point for me is please strengthen the institutions to do their jobs. It will deliver the bare minimum. And then we can work on our morality, our sense of fairness, all these other ideals that we need to bring to bear.
Thank you, Patrick. I hear a strong emphasis on strengthening institutions. And I think that's a focal point, whether you're looking at it in Uganda or you're looking at it across the region. Across Africa, we need to have those strong institutions in place to keep us resilient and to move us on into the next level. And I think this is a good point for us to pick up on the next section that we'll have, where we'll take on the other 5 points that Professor raised in his discussion. I want to thank you very much. Patrick, I thank you very much. Sophie, it has been a very engaging discussion, and I hope that our audience has also found it the same. We are caught up by time. I would like to have taken so much more. There's a lot to learn, even for myself. I've had so much that I was taking notes on. But I thank you for your time. I thank you for engaging us with your ideas and your experience. And I look forward to us taking on this discussion further in the second part when we meet next month, Lord willing. So I will, at this point, ask if there are any questions and answers, and then we will also have a prayer response. I want to apologize that we are doing not so great with the time, and so ask for the questions that are in the, I think it's in the chat. That's where we're going to look at. We will only address these questions. Please bear with me because of time. We will not take further questions, but hopefully in the second session, we will take more questions. I will read these off. Sophie and Patrick, if you can just keep your comments short, we will get time to also have an adequate prayer response. I see a question which is dealing with human capital and meritocracy. I think this is a comment: human capital, meritocracy, coaching, fathering. I am a testimony. This is from John Kawoya. Thank you, Patrick, for believing in Ugandans. And thank you, UJN, for the conversation. Blessings. This was more of a comment. Then we have a question from, I think this is Dr. James Magara. What time frame do you predict for the local impact of the continental free trade area? Maybe Patrick, you can pick up on this question. What time frame do you predict for the local impact?
Wow. Thanks for the question. 2 quick thoughts. Number one, it's happening now. We are being impacted now. What does that mean? That means that it is cheaper to import labels from, say, Egypt and cans from off the continent than it is to buy them within the continent. That's changing supply chains. As these barriers drop, it's impacting us now. That I think it's impacting the larger manufacturers more visibly than it is impacting the smaller manufacturers. But the wave is upon us. Our saving grace is that governments have reserved certain sections until the private sector is ready, and those negotiations are ongoing. I don't know the exact state of play, but if I had to guess on the spot, I would say the next 24 months are really important. They're really important, and we better just be ready because the wave is here. There's no reversing it. It's here. It's upon us.
And I think as you speak about the wave being on now, we need to engage for companies in the private sector, SMEs, find out the relevance of the continental free trade area for your business and engage so that you're not left behind in this wave.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and there's another question that how disadvantaged are Ugandan businesses in the region due to the low use of Swahili? Sophie, would you like to take that? How disadvantaged are Ugandan businesses in the region due to the low use of Swahili?
I think Patrick would be a better commenter on this, given his experience in Nairobi. Patrick, I think let me hand this over to you at this point.
Okay. Wow. I remember a time when I was selling electricity poles in Tanzania. I had a meeting with a minister and his team. All the formal work is done in English, so we're not disadvantaged there. You know, Ugandans can stand in any docket and deliver in English. All the informal conversation where the real business happens was all done in Swahili. I spent, I don't know, I grew up like 8 years in Mombasa, so my Swahili is not the worst. And somehow, by the grace of God, I was able to keep track and connect with them. We did very good business in Tanzania. If I walked into that room and all I was speaking was this language we're using here, it is unlikely I would have done business in Tanzania. So I would say without statistics that yes, we are disadvantaged by not picking up Swahili for regional trade because it's the natural flow in the markets we are trying to access. So it's in our best interest to brush up on our Swahili. The young people excite me. When you go to their schools, most schools now sing both anthems. They'll sing the East African anthem in Swahili beautifully and flawlessly before they sing the Ugandan anthem. And we need to build on that to become regionally relevant.
Thank you, Patrick. And also just to think it through, if we do not have the language yet, can we engage translators? I mean, we need to think on our feet, like you get to see some Chinese come in and they have a translator immediately. Let's find...
That would be...
Sorry,
I was just going to jump in quickly to say that that's definitely, I like it because it's practical. It allows us to continue engaging in the process as we work on the more long-term things. But it makes a big difference when you speak someone's language. Your level of acceptability is very high.
Absolutely. Yeah. Let's also think of solutions. Our young people will speak the Swahili. For the older ones, let's think practically on our feet and keep this ball rolling. We need the momentum. We have a comment that's saying very engaging discussion here. Lots to unpack from this session. And it's good that it's recorded. You can always go back and have a look and unpack and even write down questions for the next session. We have I think a comment here. What is the role? Well, it's a question. What is the role of trust in the building of an economy, raising finance, etc.? How are we faring here? Sophie, would you like to take that?
Okay. I think it's very important. It's of the essence. And the larger part of the trust is around accountability. If I think about our continent as a whole, but if I come down to our region, we are more or less in the same, the level of trust is more or less the same across the region. The difference is the Kenya is looked at as a hub. So you'd find that most people are familiar with the Kenya environment. But that said, if I look at the funds who've been able, the investors who've been able to engage, East Africa is almost looked at in the same vein. It is how can we differentiate ourselves as Uganda away from just rather to be able to attract something that will come to Uganda, because the more known entity in the region or the more known country in the region is Nairobi. It's just a differentiator. Trust is critical. The accountability. If we don't have those accounts, if we can't speak to the strategy clearly well, continuity, those are factors that drive raising of funds. And I think we have that to a good extent. From a percentage perspective on the level of trust based on accountability, Uganda is a bit lower than Kenya. But that said, we've been able to attract, especially the companies that have the right structure in place, systems, accountability. All we have to do is find a way to differentiate ourselves from a quality perspective. Yeah.
Thank you, Sophie. And again, I would just like to thank the panelists today. You have been really engaging and we have learned quite a lot. I want to thank the UJN team that has been working in the background for keeping us going and making sure all the technical work is done. We appreciate you.